Hello writers, so you've brainstormed ideas for the first 3 plot points in the first act of your story, and you're now wondering how to transition between Act 1 and Act 2. So how do you take your character into the core conflict of the story? The easiest way to do this is to set up a point of no return scene in your story. In this episode, I'll discuss the point of no return scene and its position in the story. I'll also share 2 important tips you need to consider as you write the point of no return scene. This is the 4th installment in my 3-act structure mini-series. If you're just joining me on this episode, then I will link the previous 4 episodes, the hook, the ordinary world, and the inciting incident, as well as the episode on 3-act structure in the show notes over on my blog. You can find the episode, show notes, and the links to these episodes at ameliahay.com/first plot point. This episode focuses on the final plot point in the first act, the point of no return. Often this plot point is referred to as the first plot point or the first doorway. So let's get started. So what is the first plot point? It's the moment where everything changes for your protagonist. In essence, it's the moment in which your main character can't return to the ordinary world. They can't go back, it's impossible. Events cannot be undone and things cannot be unseen. The protagonist cannot go on as if all the events leading up to this point have ever happened. In amongst all of this change, the protagonist makes a shift in their priorities or goals. This change could result from their own free will or for their own survival. As a result, the stakes are raised and they have more to lose than ever before. The protagonist makes the shift in their priorities while aware of the consequences. Life will never be the same for the protagonist, and they are fully aware of this. So when should the first plot point take place? The first plot point, or the point of no return, acts as a doorway between the first and the second act of a story. Ideally, it sits at the 25% mark in the story. This is also the point in the story where the reader expects something big to happen. I know this sounds rigid with no room for compromise, but I would like to point out that novel writing has more room for flexibility than, say, screenwriting. The structure for a screenplay has no room for flexibility. Certain moments need to happen at certain times, and if not, your screenplay gets put in the slush pile or the audience gets bored and walks out. This means refunds and not meeting the massive box office budget, or in layman's terms, it's a huge loss in profits. So why at the end of the first act? The first plot point acts as the climax of the first act. If this scene takes place too early, then the second act will drag on and the story will lose momentum. The reader will close the book and stop reading. As a writer, this is what you want to avoid. If the first plot point occurs at a later point in the story, then the first act will drag on. There will be too much setup and the reader will get bored because nothing of consequence will happen. Reading is an investment of time. A reader can't ask for a refund on the time they spent on your novel. I've had moments where I've read books and been really disappointed by its contents. I'm reading one of those books at the moment for research and it's sitting on my Kindle and I'm really considering archiving it instead of finishing it. The first thing that needs to happen is the stakes must be raised. This is where the real story starts for the protagonist. Everything before this is just set up. It's like your 21st birthday or your first day of university. Prior to this moment, you're a child, and now you're an adult with freedom and everything that comes with that. Essentially, your story grows up. In the process of growing up, the first plot point triggers the story's main conflict, and it all starts on the other side of this doorway. As the conflict increases, so does the stakes. Prior to this, the protagonist makes an impulsive decision at disruption to their ordinary world, hoping everything returns to normal, but it doesn't. Their life goes from a little pain to a huge risk. If the protagonist doesn't overcome and fails, there are huge consequences. These consequences are what's at stake for the protagonist. An example of this is life or death stakes. One moment your protagonist is trying to solve a mystery behind a murder. The next moment, someone is out to kill them before they can piece the puzzle together. This leads me to my next point. Point number 2 is a change in priorities and goals. At this point in your story, your protagonist makes a personal transition from innocent bystander to a key player with something to lose. As we established in the previous point, this something to lose is big. These stakes force your protagonist to reevaluate their priorities. Following on from the previous example, featuring the life and death stakes, your protagonist's goal moves from collecting evidence and solving a crime to survival. The protagonist is on the run from an unknown entity and must collect the evidence to figure out who the murderer is and reveal the identity of the people that are out to kill him. This isn't just a change in goals, it's a larger goal with a bigger risk. Here is an example of the point of no return scene from Harry Potter. In Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, or Sorcerer's Stone as it's referred to in America, the point of no return scene is when Harry boards the Hogwarts Express. I know there is a lot of debate over whether this moment is the first plot point, but bear with me. Until this point in the story, Harry would have returned to Pivot Drive and carried on as per usual. But this is the point where he steps into the magical world a second time and sees the train that will take him to the school. Everything is now real. Up until this point, he has gone from living under a staircase to experiencing the magical world where his parents lived and has met other magical children like him. And that's before he reaches Hogwarts. This is every orphan's dream, to reconnect with their parents or their history. He suddenly makes sense and fits in somewhere. This is an important moment for Harry. This is really the point of no return. He figures out where he belongs. For those of you who want to dig a little deeper into writing a great point of no return scene, then I recommend these 2 books. The first one is Structuring Your Novel: The Essential Keys for Writing an Outstanding Story by K.M. Weiland. Just to make reading a little easier for you, the information about the point of no return scene is in chapter 6. The second book, as you may have guessed, is Write Great Fiction: Plot and Structure, Techniques for and Exercises for Crafting Plot That Grips Readers from Start to Finish by James Scott Bell. I know I keep going back to this book, but it's so good. This book makes story structure easier to understand and apply. Chapter 2 is where all the great information about story structure is. Bell refers to the first plot point, or the point of no return scene, as the first doorway. As he explains, this scene transitions the protagonist from the first act to the second act, hence his doorway terminology. The point of no return scene is the climax of Act 1. It's the moment when your protagonist cannot return to their ordinary world even if they wanted to. The key to creating an exciting Act 1 climax is to place it at the 25% mark of your story. At this point in the story, you need to raise the stakes and create a moment where your protagonist changes their goal. As always, I have an important question to ask you. Are you writing your first novel? Or are you trying to figure out how you're going to transition your character from the first to the second act? If so, which one of these tips did you find most helpful? Let me know by coming over to the blog post or the YouTube video and sharing in the comments section below. If you like this video, then give it a thumbs up, and if you're new to this channel and want to be notified about more videos just like this, then hit the subscribe button. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode of the Indie Authorpreneur Podcast.